There you go. Welcome everybody. Satsang, July 30th. Almost through July. Hard to believe it. I don't know if you've ever noticed, one of the things they talk about a lot when we're talking about Maharaj or Ramesh is they will talk about what arises in consciousness. So, the world we're living in right now arises in consciousness, and so we all spot that. And then if we have a dream, then that's an arising in consciousness. That's right. And and they always talk about that as though they're the same thing. But for most of us, I would guess, or I would bet that this, when you wake up in the morning, feels a lot more solid than any dream. That your lived life, the one that arises, this participation piece that we're in right now. And there's a reason for that, and the basic reason is that consciousness, intuition knows that there's such a thing as permanent peace, or permanence, or or absolute awareness, where there's absolutely no ripple or anything. That's a known. But what consciousness tries to do is create that in our dream, right? In our life as it arises every day. And so one of the things to watch is how we go after that and how we do that, how we try to make this part of our life permanent. We try to make it something that we can quote unquote depend on. Now we do that as though we're an object and everything else is something we depend on. It's done within duality, right? And so what we're going to do today is we're going to play a little bit with that. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through chapter 8 of Ramesh's Pointers, and that's entitled Proof of Truth. And we talk a little bit about intellect, and we talk about a little bit of other stuff. So here we go. Here goes Ramesh. He says, can there be a proof of truth? He says, Maharaj sometimes puts this question as if to himself, can truth be grasped intellectually? Apart from keen intellect, says Maharaj, the seeker must have faith to enable him to grasp the basic essentials of truth. And the faith should be of the kind that can accept the guru's word as God's own truth. Faith is the first step, and no other progress is possible until the first step is taken first. There are simple-minded people, which I'm not sure I like that translation, by the way, or that word, but anyway, he says, who, though not gifted with keen intellect, have abundant faith. Maharaj gives them a mantra and asks them to chant it and meditate until their psyche is purified enough to receive knowledge. Right? Because remember what knowledge is, what we call knowledge is just the painting on afterwards of what arises. So all of this stuff about how wonderful intellect is, like when he uses the word simple-minded, that almost infers that somehow they're in a lower level than the intellectual folks who are not simple-minded. That's why I don't like that particular usage there, because the reality is that the intellectual approach, the Advaita or non-duality, is really for those of us that get caught in our head and we're looking for a way to unwind it. So we want to say who's simple-minded in that case, right? So with the intellectuals, Maharaj has to deal differently. The intellectual understands what various religions propagate, the ethical and moral codes they prescribe, and the metaphysical concepts. Here's a word for you, adumbrate. I'm assuming that means distribute. But he remains unenlightened. What he actually seeks is truth, the constant factor that is not subject to any change. So that's truth. Truth is the factor that's not subject to any change. And what is more, he wants proof, but is not able to say what kind of proof would satisfy him. So notice the world that's being set up there with the intellectual. He wants truth, he wants something permanent, and then he wants proof of that permanence, but he can't really say what kind of proof would make him happy. And that's kind of a fix. He says, proof as such itself would be something subject to space and time. And the intellectual is intelligent enough to know that to know that. Truth, in order to be truth, must be timeless and spaceless. Maharaj says that any intelligent person must admit that I am the sense of conscious presence of being is the only truth every sentient being knows of. In other words, they know that they exist. Remember last week we said we know we exist and everything else is interpretation. So this is actually going back into that same space. And yet, mere existence of every sentient being knows of, and that is the only proof one can have. So the only proof that one can have is simply the knowing that they exist. Okay, that existence is. And yet existence cannot be equated with truth for the simple reason that existence itself is not timeless and spaceless like reality. So this sense of permanence that we keep trying to give things, we're trying to give things in our world that we exist a permanence that only exists in timelessness and spacelessness. In other words, it doesn't exist in duality itself. Right? So Maharaj in his talks throws abundant light on this stalemate. A blind man says, "Prove to me that there are colors. Only then will I believe your lovely description of the rainbow." Whenever such questions are put to Maharaj, he encounters them by saying, "Prove to me that there is something like Bombay, London, or New York. Everywhere," says he, "it's the same earth, air, water, fire, and sky." In other words, one cannot seek truth as an object, nor can truth be described. It can only be suggested or indicated, but not expressed in words. Do you see where the whole sense of a pointer comes from? A pointer is something that indicates or suggests, it points to, but it does that with the understanding that it itself should not be grabbed onto as something that is truth. Right? Because truth cannot be conceived. Anything conceived will be an object, and truth is not an object. As Maharaj puts it, you cannot shop for truth as something which is authoritatively certified and stamped as truth. Any attempt to find the truth would involve a division of the mind into subject and object, and then the answer could not be the truth, because there is nothing objective about truth, which essentially is pure subjectivity. Right? So when we say that word pure subjectivity, it's the same as saying I am. Right? Pure subjectivity is just the sense that one exists. That's what subjectivity is. So a lot of times these big fancy terms actually are really simple. You can get a 5-year-old to say, "I know I exist." And if you ask a 5-year-old what pure subjectivity is, they likely won't know the answer. But those are the same thing. So the whole process, says Maharaj, is like a dog chasing its own tail. Seeking a solution to this riddle one must analyze the problem itself. Who is it that wants, it always gets to this, right? Who is it that wants proof of truth or reality? Do we clearly understand what we are? Because the minute that you assume that you are something and that you are looking for something, you have stepped outside of the possibility. There is no possibility in that. So you notice that even, a lot of the non-dualists, when somebody says, "Are you enlightened?" you can just see they hate to answer that question, right? Because they know it's misleading, right? There's no you that can be enlightened. Enlightenment is, right? Awakening is a revelation, it's an opening. That's all it is, right? And it does occur in certain body minds. That's what all seekers are those body minds that are looking for that to happen. But it's almost always entered into with the misconception that there's an I looking for something, right? And we ride that bike for a long while. I mean, probably most of you like me were seekers, and for years before it dawned on you, oh, wait a minute, the one that's doing the seeker is where the action is, right? It's not in the seeking itself. So you spend years looking for something, only to come to a moment and go, oh my goodness, right? So all existence is objective. We exist as objects only. So existence, what we call existence, right, is what arises within consciousness itself. Right? That's existence. So it's duality. So we all exist as objects only, as mere appearances in consciousness that cognizes us. Is there any proof that we, who seek proof of reality, ourselves exist other than as objects of cognition in someone else's mind? Right? When we seek the proof of truth, what we are trying to do is equivalent to a shadow seeking the proof of substance. Right? I used to enjoy the little thing that Ramesh used to always say. He would be. Can you imagine watching a movie, right? And all of the actors are playing their perfect part. And all of a sudden, one of the actors stops and says, "Wait a minute. Who am I? What am I doing? I'm looking for something here." Right? Well, that's silly. Like, who would do that in the middle of a movie or in the middle of a script? So, so the reality is that's actually what we're trying to do, right? The script is pretty much ready to go. It's in the can, as Ramesh used to always say. And we think we can step outside of that as though we're not the actor, right? But the creator of the script itself. Maharaj therefore urges us to see the false as false. So what's the false? The false is that we are, as a body mind, anything that could find truth. And then there will be no more looking for truth. Right? You see how easy that is? There's no more seeking for truth. Have you understand what I mean? He asks, do you intuitively feel what the position is? That which is sought is the seeker itself. So when we start with Advaita, we start with the I am, right? And then we stay with the I am. And what it does is it dissolves, right? The watching dissolves the I am, and underneath that is absolute awareness. Right? They always operate together, by the way. The I am doesn't go away within consciousness. So just so you know, it's just that there is another perception called apperception that lives there. So can the I see itself? Please understand, timeless, spaceless, not cognizable sensorially is what we are. So that's what we are. Temporal, finite is separate objects. So that's the false. The false is the false is to believe that's what we are. That's only what we are. Right? Consider what you were before you acquired the physical form. Did you need any proof about anything then? I find that to be just a fascinating question. What were you before you acquired the physical form? And before that acquisition, did you need any proof about anything at that point? I mean, there was no intellect there, right? The intellect is something that actually is operational within the human body mind. The question of proof only arises in relative existence, and any proof provided within the parameters of relative existence can only be an untruth. So, the whole point of this is the attempt to solidify what can't be solidified is folly, right? And so now the thing is, how do we notice that in our everyday actions, right? How do we notice that we're trying that solidification is happening? Now, once we see it, we just see it, right? Because consciousness will take care of it over time, but it's just something to be seen that likely we are conditioned to be seeking something. And within that seeking something, we are solidifying things that really don't have solidity. And we have a really awesome reason for that, right? Intuitively we know that there is something permanent. And where else would we go try to find that something permanent other than what we see in front of us within duality? And all we're pointing out is that that's misconceived. So this is a step. This is like kind of going from high school to graduate school, right? When you quit seeking for something outside and you recognize that all there is the inside, now your movement has basically changed. And then what happens, of course, is that once you see that, you're still stuck with all the conditioning you've had for a lifetime. So the reason that this whole conversation happens is just to say, watch it, because you're going to continue to do that. Right? Right. You remember the first time you rode a bike, right? Your dad was probably running backwards, going, go, dude, that's great, that's great, that's great, right? Well, the next time you went out down on a bike, you didn't just get on the bike and ride it, right? You probably fell off 5 more times. That's how this is. It's the knowing that you can ride a bike. It's the moment that you see what balance is, and then having balance actually become something that's comfortable and usable every moment, right? There's a step from that, and that's now what the seeking becomes about. Any questions? I see. Is there a question brewing, Joseph?
No, there's not a
Good.
question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Joseph and I have been around each other long enough. I can see in his face sometimes when there's a question starting to come. I know you guys weren't here last week, Sachit and Jay, but I told him, I said, when he wasn't here a couple weeks ago, I took his name in vain. So,
No, I had this awareness this morning actually with the Zen koan that goes, "Who were you before you were born?" And so what I understood is, or I got was that we are born as a separate self every time we identify with the separate self. Before that identification, then there's kind of like a free space. But we are born every time we get reactive to something, we like that.
well, so and remember I talk about how our story, the story of individuality, covers the whole canvas, which is the absolute awareness underneath it, right?
Right,
So when you see this, you go, oh my goodness, we should let life itself, right, shrink so that absolute awareness and life as it emerges are all happening, right? So there's a complete awareness of all of that, right? That could be. But remember, if you're where Joseph and I are, we've got 70 plus years of conditioning that says once you start doing that, you cover the canvas. So you can see it, but stepping into it, right? That's why the
right.
clone is such a wonderful thing,
Yeah,
because it stupefies the mind for a moment. You go, whoa, but wait, that makes no sense. Sound of one hand clapping. What were you before you were born? Those are stupid questions, right? They are. But what they do is they shut down the process that makes us cover the canvas and gives an opportunity for revelation maybe to
right,
to, to occur.
right.
So I'm going to go on to this next little piece, and it's called missing the line. And all the line is the moment when a pointer, I'm talking specifically about pointers to things, right? And how we take those and we make them solid. We make them into truth, right? And we miss the line. In other words, the pointer's there, which can be just simply heard, and it lives itself the way it needs to live itself, or as a me. So a Jay or a Sachit or a Joseph, I grab onto it and make it something, right? And that's what we've been doing all along. That's missing the line, right? The line is there when the pointers in existence is simply a suggestion or a pointing, but when we grab onto it, make it something, right? And I often talk about that. I always say, watch yourself with all the memes, right? Because boy, we go, well, look at that meme. That's a really great one. There's two things going on wrong with a lot of times with meme. Number one, they're meant as pointers, and almost always they're meant in a specific situation. So we like to universalize those as though they apply to everyone equally at all times. So those are just two things to watch, and that's why you hold pointers. The ones that affect you, let the sway happen, and that's where you are. So missing the line. Two monks in training were passionate smokers. and they found great difficulty sitting in meditation. Unable to resolve the dilemma between themselves, they each decided to ask their own superior. The next day they met to compare notes. The first monk said, "My superior was furious that I even asked the question." The other said, "Well, that's surprising. I asked mine, can I pray when I'm smoking?" And he said, "Certainly, my son." "What did you ask?" said the second. "Ah," he said, "I asked, could I smoke while I'm praying?" Right? Same question. Same situation, the same two activities, framed differently. They produce the opposite answers. One a scolding, one a blessing. Nothing's changed except the order of the words. And yet everything has changed. That is what concepts do. They are not neutral containers. They carry orientation, and orientation changes meaning entirely. It's easy to see this in this joke. It's much harder to see in ourselves. In the stories we tell about what we know, what we have understood, what we're qualified to pass along. And yet this is precisely where concepts do their most significant damage, not in the obvious errors, but in the places where we feel most certain. Right? Notice that. Papaji used to tell his followers two things: come to satsang and keep quiet. The first instruction is obvious: show up, be present, sit in the field of the teaching. But the second requires looking more carefully. Why keep quiet? Because the natural tendency of a mind in duality is to take whatever it has received and lock it into place, stabilize it, own it. Papaji, he knew he was offering pointers, not conclusion, and he understands exactly what happens when a pointer gets mistaken for a conclusion. I can tell you, when I was in the ashram, we would come out of Osho giving satsang, and we would all head down to the German bakery, where we would immediately try to basically uh, crystallize what he had told us in terms of pointers. Right? Every evening, straight down to the German bakery, and the Pharisees, those of us who were doing that, would sit around and we would discuss these pointers. Right? That's what the keeping quiet's about. Right? Keeping quiet is not engaging necessarily, if possible, in that making things concrete. Ramana Maharshi said something similar. Pointers are like thorns. You use the thorn to extract another thorn from your skin, and then you throw both thorns away. Right? So you can see that the thorn was never the point, the extraction was. Right? But we are so accustomed to accumulating that we collect the thorns instead. We arrange them, we polish them, we display them, and we eventually use them to scratch anyone who comes close enough. We post them on Facebook, right? Yeah. There is a line, invisible but real, where a pointer is alive and where a pointer is dead. On the one side, the pointer is doing what it is meant to do, pointing beyond itself, indicating something that cannot be held, directing attention toward what lies outside the capacity of the concept. On the other side, the pointer has become a brick. It has weight, it has definition, it has been memorized, categorized, and is now available for distribution. It's deeper than just missing the line. Once a living pointer has become something you possess, you have already crossed the line. Now, being from California, I like to say we're experts at that, those of us who are Californians, because think about what we do in California. We go to a seminar, we spend a whole weekend, right? Then we come home, and on Monday morning, we form an LLC. We find a name that's close to the name of the seminar we just went to, right? And we send out a bunch of stuff, and by Saturday, we're teaching. Now, what that does, of course, is that we've crystallized what we've learned, but also recognize that it limits where it is that you're going to go. Once you quote unquote become an expert in something, what is the movement at that point? You're locked into the concept you've crystallized. That's why it's so dangerous. See, we all love to teach. Think about it. We recite internally. That's teaching ourselves. Papaji said, keep quiet. We recite to friends and often strangers. We focus on what we think is being delivered. But what are we doing to ourselves? Transforming pointers into bricks we call teachings. Osho used to warn about this. Beware of thinking you have found the answer, and even then, please don't teach it. Can't tell you how many times he said that. Why? Because the minute you've internally locked a teaching into place, you've also locked your own movement into place. In other words, you have stopped at the place you so happily thought was your breakthrough. You've missed the line. That mythical line where a pointer, like bird's wings leaving no tracks, turns into a cow pie frisbee hurtling through the air like a brick. Hold on one sec here. Osho would often follow on when he saw this solidification occur and say, see that guy? His mouth is moving and words are tumbling out. He actually thinks he's saying something. Papaji does not want his flock to become empty mouth slingers. The empty vessel making the most sound convicts the sound as substance. Papaji does not want his people to become this, neither did Osho. Neither, for that matter, did any teacher who actually understood what they were doing, which is why the instruction is always some variation of the same thing. Keep quiet. Not as a permanent posture, but as an ongoing recognition that speech, when it comes from a solidified concept rather than a living understanding, has crossed the line. In chapter 8 of Pointers, the one we just did, Maharaj addresses precisely this dynamic through a different angle. The question at hand is proof. Can there be proof of truth? Can truth be grasped intellectually? Maharaj's examination of this question is one of the most precise dismantlings in the book. He begins by noting that the intellectual actually wants the constant factor, the thing not subject to change, and some form of verification that it has been found. The intellectual wants proof, but when pressed, cannot say what proof would satisfy. And this is not a failure of imagination. It's a structure of the problem itself. Proof, by definition, exists within the parameters of space and time. It is something that can be pointed to, examined, and confirmed. But truth, if truth is what is being sought, the unchanging ground beneath all appearance, cannot be an object within these parameters. The moment you point to it, you have made it a thing among other things. You've placed it on one side of the subject-object division, and anything on one side of that division is not the whole, it is a piece. Maharaj offered an analogy. A blind man demands proof that colors exist before he will believe descriptions of a rainbow. The demand sounds reasonable, but Maharaj's counters prove to me that there's something called Bombay or London or New York. Everywhere he says it is the same: earth, air, water, fire, and sky. The name, the label, the concept, those are the tools we use to divide a seamless whole into manageable pieces. And we mistake the pieces for reality. He called this the dog chasing his own tail. Who is it that wants the proof? The seeker. And what is the seeker? An appearance in consciousness. An object in the field of awareness looking for source of that awareness as though it were another object in the same field. Right? We all exist as objects only, he said, as mere appearances in the consciousness that cognizes us. To seek proof of truth from within this position is to be a shadow seeking proof of the substance that casts it. And then the line that cuts through everything: see the false as the false, and there will be no more looking for truth. Right? Once you see that the who you are is made up and it occupies this object in space in arising consciousness, right? You see that isn't truth, right? That's false. That's who you think you are, who you've assumed you are. Once you see that that's false, well, then having that particular entity go looking for something else is really absurd. That's all he's pointing out. So he didn't say find the truth and hold it up as proof, not accumulate correct understanding until the weight of it constitutes certainty. Simply see the false as false. Don't say to do anything, just see it. The concepts, the locked in teaching, the bricks we have been calling pointers, see them for what they are. When the false is seen as false, the looking stops. And when the looking stops, What remains does not need to be proven. But remember, the line usually cannot be seen by the one carrying the brick. By the time the one looks for it who's carrying the brick, the line's already been passed. Nasruddin, of course, has arrived at this impasse by a different route. So, you've heard this one before, but it's one of my favorites. One day, the mullah lost the key to his house. He called all of his friends together for a mass search. He led them to the busiest part of the local market, got down on his hands and knees in the most densely trafficked area, and began searching in every corner. His friends diligently followed until one of them looked up and asked, "Mullah, is this where you lost your key?" "Nope," Nasruddin replied immediately, "but I thought this would be the best place to look because it is lit so well." So finding the truth out there, man, that's a path we've done 1,000 or more times, right? So where do we go look? Well, we ought to just go down the same path. It's really well lit, that path. We've been there a lot. We know right where it is. Don't have to look for much. The pointers seek the light. Look where you can see clearly has taken on a life of its own. It has become rigid. It is being followed with complete sincerity in the situation where it is absolutely useless. The pointer crossed the line somewhere between original wisdom it was born from and the mechanical application of what it has become. The most telling detail, Nasruddin is entirely committed. He's not confused. He is following the rule, and the rule is obviously correct. Of course, you look where the light is. This is what missing the line looks like from the inside. It feels like clarity. It feels like competence. The mouth is moving and the words are tumbling out. The mullah is genuinely looking. What he is not doing is finding the key. Right? I have watched this tendency in myself over the many years of teaching, and it is humbling to report that I have missed the line more often than I would like. There's a deep urge to serve and to take what seems obvious and offer it to whoever is struggling nearby. The impulse is real, and I don't regret it. But helpfulness has its own version of Nasruddin's marketplace. It is easy to confuse helping with enabling. Easy to eliminate necessary experience for someone else because the solution seems obvious from where I am standing. In those moments, I'm not actually offering a pointer. I'm handing someone a brick and calling it a thorn. That's why Papaji said, keep quiet. The line is crossed so smoothly you rarely feel it. What you feel is the satisfaction of having understood something well enough to pass it along. What you do not feel is the moment when understanding crystallized into position, when the living thing became a fixture, when the bird's wing leaving no tracks became a brick hurtling through the air. That moment has no sensation, which is exactly why Papaji said keep quiet, not as a rule against speaking, but as a standing instruction to check before the mouth opens whether what is about to come out is still alive. Maharaj instructions lands on the same place. Can an eye see itself? That which is sought is the seeker. The one looking for the proof of truth is made of the same stuff as the truth being sought. This cannot be proven from the outside. It can only be recognized from the inside. And recognition is not the same as possession. Revelation. We're in the game of revelation. We're not in the game of acquisition, possession, solidifying, holding, grasping, all of those words, right? Revelation. You cannot put recognition in your pocket and teach it on Tuesday. So here is where this lands practically and concretely. We miss the line because we've never thought to locate it. So now we know. That's all this is. It's just going, hey, here's what happens. We did not know there was a line. We assumed that understanding was accumulative, that more was better. The clarity led to more clarity. The concepts properly arranged would eventually produce the scene that concepts by their nature cannot produce. I tell a story about myself. I'm one of those, if if a small hammer is good, a medium hammer is better, and a large hammer is better yet. Right? That's what this is, this developing of concepts. And I think I was about 8 years old, and my mother came downstairs one day, and I had 12 aspirin out. I was going to take some aspirin. And my mother, alarmed, said, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Well, Mom, you gave me 2 aspirin a few weeks ago, and it worked really well. So the next time I tried 4, right? And it worked better, right?" And I'm thinking this time I'm going to take a dozen, because if 2 worked really good and then 4 worked better, 12's got to be the answer. That's how we think, right? So if you know a concept somewhat well, what do? Double down, put steroids on that baby, get that thing really clear and really like that, right? Because we always want to possess concepts. We've been taught to do that. See, we know the line is there. That's the pointer, not a conclusion, not a possession, a pointer. It shows us what to look for. The moment when a living thing hardens, the moment when a bird's wing becomes a brick, the moment Nasruddin is searching in the marketplace with full conviction and no key. When we notice that moment in ourselves, in our speech, in the speed which a fresh insight turns into a talking point, the instruction is simple. Come to satsang, keep quiet. Not because silence is the destination, but because the line has been found, and standing quietly at it is more honest than crossing it with great confidence in the wrong direction. And ultimately, the line disappears when there is no one left to possess a pointer. The key is somewhere else. We know it. And maybe that is enough to go on. So I want to tell one little story, because I think you guys might get a kick out of it. How do you spot this? How do you spot this when it's happening, right? How's it feel inside? So years ago, I was in Osho's ashram at the time, and I had a German girlfriend. She lived in Cologne. So I was coming back to the US, and I decided to spend a couple weeks in Cologne. And one morning in Germany, one of the things that they do is everybody goes down and gets their rolls and everything at the bakery, whatever bakery is near you or which one you like, you go and you do that. And of course, all the Germans in the house that day that I was staying with, about 6 people, none of them could do that. They weren't available to go get the bread. And so I was just there on vacation. So I was easily available to go do that. There's only one problem. I don't speak German. So no problem, we got around, and they gave me about 4 sentences, and I speak Spanish. And so I sat down and I practiced those sentences, because I had to get two kinds of rolls and another pastry. So I had to be able to put all the sentences down when I got to the bakery to tell whoever was going to give me the order in German what it was I wanted. So I practiced I practiced. I really practiced. I really had these sentences down. And so this following morning at 7 a.m., I go down to the bottom. Always remember it because it was during winter, so it was dark. 7 a.m., pitch dark in Cologne, by the way. And I get down and I walk into the door of the bakery. And behind the counter, there was this lovely woman, probably in her 60s, gray hair, glasses, kind of a glint in her eye. Really seemed like a friendly lady. And I proceeded into my sentences. I had four really serious sentences here, and I'd worked on those. I had recited them so many times. I was ready to go. So I launch off into my sentences, and I'm about a sentence and a half in. And she holds up her hand, and I stop. And she says, "Sweetheart," she says, "I lived in Laguna Beach for 40 years. You want to just tell me your order?" And I'll never forget that moment, right? But what that moment is the moment that possible awakening is responding to the who you are. When you have recited and you're delivering it to what matters most, and awakening to be says, "Sweetheart, I lived in Laguna Beach for 40 years. Why don't you just let me help you?" That's what the pointers do. They deliver you into that world, not into the world where you can walk in and recite the 4 sentences that you practiced for God knows how many hours the night before. So but you notice it, right? I remember in that moment, I was like, wow, I had this thing, and all of a sudden it released. It was done. It was over. I didn't need those sentences anymore. Drop, done, finished. Right. And I was back to this fresh, spontaneous world of what do you need in terms of, what does everybody need? We'll put it in a bag and get you out of here. But you can actually feel it when it happens. That's all I'm trying to point out. And and it happens in the simplest of times. I mean, that's a stupid little story I just told, but I could track it inside, right? I could go, oh, look, I look at solid. I went from solidity to non-solidity. Bang. Easy to track, easy to see. So now there's some, okay, cool. Nothing to do, just simply watch. But there's now a revealing of, oh, the seeker in me must be a really hard-headed kind of a body mind that goes around and grabs onto truth and really solidifies it and then tries to present it to everybody to try to get feedback to know that he's headed in the right direction. That's probably the conditioning that's going on there, right? And that describes me as a seeker probably to a T. So I'm here to say that didn't work, right? And just see it. See it when you do that to yourself. A lot of times you'll hear something in satsang and you go, oh, wait a minute, I've got something to say. And if you'll watch, you see it's you presenting the concepts that are already solidly held by you. The ones that you really are, the ones you're hoping will dissolve, right? You know that's not who you are. You know those concepts that make you solid aren't the things that you're really after. And you can see it in the simplest of every. The one thing about this is there's nothing that's not in the game. Where is revelation available? It's available in all that arises whenever it arises. That's where it is. So the reason I tell stories a lot of times like that is that we all have tangible, we are I ams, and we all live in a world of stories. And I would say there's three levels of stories. There's a level, one's a gift. I just tell you something, hey, it's 3 doors down and to the right. Great. That's a gift, right? Or I tell you something to convince you something. I'm trying to move the needle, right? And the highest level of story is simply to say something that allows the other person to step in there and stand there with you, because there really aren't two people at all. There's just one. So when a story is told, that's an invitation for you to be me and me to be you. It's a recognition that we're the same thing. So don't be afraid, right? It's not about reciting, but when you have a pointer, if a story goes with it, great. Your story's there. That can be an invitation for somebody to step inside it. Now, I have no solution. I just know that pointers can become solidified. And having been a practitioner of solidification at the highest level, I have stories about that, and they happened every day and in every particular place. And you probably do too. So just watch, and you'll see that. All right. Any comment at this point? Sachit's got a
Kind of,
smile like that. Go ahead.
does it feel sort of a calling to teach after hearing such heady stuff over several months and years and whatnot, and have a moment of absolute awareness and sit on the edge of our bed and kind of just feel the witness dissolve, and then we come out of that state after a few minutes and then say, Eureka, I've got it. Now I want to go and teach. But what you had said today is basically don't teach, be quiet and come to satsang. How will we know when we're ready to teach?
You'll know.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll know. You'll know. Because here's what we did, right? In in my experience, the one thing I've really found out about myself, I mean, this body mind, is that it's really simple. Like when somebody says, "Oh, that man's intellectual," I kind of go, I almost squirm when they say that, because the reality is, I'm a simple kid from the dirt that tells stories, right? That's pretty much That's pretty, I mean, I tell stories about my grandfather when I'm 5. We named worms and we had stories that went with them, you know. And that's really where I live. But you know, it was really interesting that when you think about recognizing yourself as an autonomous individual, right? You do that. One of the things a lot of us do is we intellectualize ourselves. We try to make ourselves something a lot more than we really are. And I did a lot of that. So after Osho's thing, we would go down and we would start discussing all of these points, right? And what I was doing was sharpening up, right? That was like sharpening the blade to become really up, because then I could be a really good teacher, man, sharp. And the reality is, I'm not, as a teacher, that's not who I am, right? As a teacher, I'm a simple storyteller. Ultimately, I'm a kid from the dirt. And when the intellect is painted on, right? I'm all that's happening is you have Alan the performer, right? Well, there comes a time when Alan the performer is really seen for what it is, right? So somebody says, well, let's talk about absolute subjectivity, and I go, well, let's call it something simple. That's the reason I go, let's call it something simple, because you know, talking about noumenon and phenomenon and absolute and all of those really amazing terms, I have found that they all live in the simplest of human stories, right? That's why I love the Nasruddin stories. That's why, you know, even when I was doing practice and leadership in the corporate world, I ended up going into these places where all these people talked and all of these terms and everything, right? These incredible terms, right? And to me, the impact was in telling simple stories and actually inviting someone to stand with you in the story. That was where the impact was. That just happens to be what this body and mind does. So I suspect, Tim, if you look into it, you'll see when you're ready to teach, you'll know, because your teaching will have the flavor that's perfect. And likely the way you teach now is something you've learned how to do. So those two things are likely not the same thing.
But thank you.
Anything else? We stunned everybody into silence, isn't that?
Well, I'll say a couple words.
Okay.
Well, you know that I used to post on Facebook 3, 4, 5 times a week all my revelations, and I was so proud of those. You know, I would have these epiphanies, and I would think I arrived at the jackpot every time I thought I arrived at the jackpot, and I would convince myself it wasn't my ego, but that if somebody benefited from this writing, then it's worth putting out there. And well, you never blew me up back then, but you blew me up today. But I've already been blown up, you know. I've only posted a couple times in the last year, simply because I recognized those revelations that I was having were really just for me. You know what I mean? They weren't for anybody else. And for me to crystallize them and re-deliver them was me just getting on a horse, trying to be something, you know, and the tension is so much less now that I'm not constantly trying to figure out how to put stuff out that other people can benefit from. um, there's much less tension just being quiet and holding everything internally. That's it.
Yep. A lot of times I tell that story when I was in a CEO group at a very young age. I think I was 29 or 30. It was my first big company, and I'm in this group with a lot of guys that are really older that had incredible experience. And one day we were assigned to go around and say, what's the main attribute of, executive leadership attribute of this person? Now I was a young guy in the group and everybody knew it, and all of the guys were really uncomfortable because they couldn't really find, we could say, oh, this man has wisdom and experience, and well, I didn't have any of those things. So um, so we got around, and it was really funny. One of the marketing guys, who's a dear friend of mine, he looked down the table and he said, you know, Alan's main attribute is the ability to make the obvious more so. And everybody laughed, you know, because it was this really cool way of releasing the pressure. There was no more pressure to try to find something that I was, and nobody was, you know, it was just this wonderful moment. Well, the funny thing, and this is, I'm going back to what I was talking about before, Tim, is that when we got right down to it, right, in the end, believe it or not, they were spot on. That is exactly the out of this body mind, the ability to make the obvious more so. That is it. That's it, right? And it's, you know, and that's in the teaching, you know, if you watch the teaching and everything. And one of the things that when that place is found within you, when consciousness has that, is employing that particular piece, well, you don't necessarily go looking to fill in the blanks for everybody else. You tell the story, and then you let them fall into the water and find their own way out. And that becomes a teaching style. It's a weird teaching style. It's not one that everybody uses, right? But it is a teaching style.
And that's what you were doing to me, because you actually encouraged me. You said, "Oh yeah, I like that you're writing." You know what I mean? And it just let me fall right in. Anyway.
He's right. So anyway, because when you do that, when you're doing that, you find the end of it yourself, right? When you're writing and writing and writing, it dawns on you one day. You go, "Oh, wait a minute," you know. There's some the revealings that are happening to you. They kind of lead you to the place where you go, "Oh, this is probably not something that I ought to be doing," and then you know.
Yeah,
so,
that's what happened.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you everybody for today. I think I'll take the signal and we'll march off. It was wonderful. If you have any questions, jump in. We're gonna have some. We'll have some more fun next week for sure. All right.
Great. Thank you, Alan.
Thank
All right.
you.
Great, thank you all.
Enjoyed it.
Much
Thank
love,
you very
everybody.
much.
Okay. See you guys
Bye.
next Thursday.
Alrighty.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.